Ji, Assalamu alaikum. So the topic of today's video is going to be our function, which is called lookup. And there are mainly three types that we actually refer to. One is lookup, one is VLOOKUP, and one is HLOOKUP. VLOOKUP stands for the vertical lookup, and the HLOOKUP stands for the horizontal lookup. So let me open up an example to further elaborate this concept. All right. So I've got a sample data in which I have a grading key over here in which all the grades are listed. And I've got some percentage of the different subjects, which is percentage ICT, maths, and English. And below this, I have some names of some students and their respective grades. So the idea is to display the correct percentage for each grade for the student. So for instance, if Hassan has scored an A grade, so Hassan's percentage in ICT should be displayed as 85. So it needs to look up this value from this table and need to give us the corresponding answer in the correct cell, right? So for percentage maths, it should display 90, and for percentage English, it should display 80. Now, in order to do this, first of all, let's try the simple lookup function. For the percentage ICT, we'll click on the cell where we want the grade or the status or the percentage to be displayed. So we'll put in equals to sign and we'll type in lookup. When we open up the bracket, we get to see that there are two types of simple lookup. So let's try the most basic one, in which only two requirements are there. One is the lookup value. Lookup value refers to the value which you're trying to look up from a range of values. So in this particular case, we're trying to look up this value which exists in B12. Please note that I have not specified the grade in it. I have just given a cell reference, which is B12. So it does not matter what the value is in that particular cell. It will only be taking the reference from that cell. Next, in order to have the second requirement fulfilled for this function, we'll put in a comma. And now we've moved up to the next requirement of the function, which is the array. And for that, we're going to specify this whole range, which starts from A3 to B8. Now let's look up the meaning of this particular function. So it will try to look up this value which exists in B12. It'll try to look up in this array of values or range of values. As soon as it finds it, it will give us the corresponding answer. So when I press enter, it gives us 85, which is exactly what the percentage ICT is for grade A. So we do have an answer, and it is the right one by applying a simple lookup function. Now, if I have to apply this for all my entries, what do? I'll just click and drag the bottom right corner of the cell to replicate it from all entries in the table. And as you can see that these entries are not displaying the correct value, which is why it was important to go through my relative cell referencing and absolute cell referencing lecture. So if I double click on it, I need to identify that what cell references in my function are to be made absolute. So by looking at this particular example, when I replicate, my lookup value is basically this grade. So when I replicated one cell downwards, it should also refer to the lookup value which exists over here and not here. So that means my lookup value has to remain with relative cell referencing. But look at my range. My range for all the entries or for all the students should remain constant. It should not move. It should not be relative referencing. It should be made static. So for that, I will select the array and I will press F4 to have the dollar sign before and after column name which actually makes the values of the cell ranges absolute vertically and horizontally. So when I press enter and I replicate again for all my entries, I do get the corresponding percentages for all my students. So let's check a couple of entries. If the grade is C, the percentage should appear as 65, which is exactly as it is over here. So for now, the simple lookup function actually works. But there are two issues with the simple lookup function, as the lookup function works on approximation. So let's make some changes to our table. Now, usually when you're trying to make a lookup function, your range should be this whole range. And we are also going to make it static. Now let's see when we replicate, do we get the right answer? Is it intelligent enough to find only the percentage ICT from our table? So I will replicate it for all my entries. I do get some answers, but let's check whether they are correct or not. So looking at D, or the grade D, the percentage ICT is appearing as 50, which is actually not the case, as the percentage ICT is actually 55 and not 50. But let's check in this particular row, where do we get 50? We get 50 under the percentage English, which is actually our last column. Okay, now let's take a look at grade E. The percentage appearing should be 40, but over here the percentage ICT is actually 50, which is not the case. And again, if we look at the row E, 40 is appearing under percentage English. So what I understand from this is, in the simple lookup function, no matter what range do you specify, no matter how many columns there are in your range, it is going to find the correct value from the lookup value, and it will only correspond to the rightmost value in the column, or the rightmost column will be displayed or will be considered for the corresponding values. So let's change the column or the array to only these entries, and let's see that whether it refers to the percentage ICT or will it refer to the extreme right column in our array, which is actually under percentage maths. We'll make their values absolute and we press enter. And now we are going to replicate for all my entries. The values have changed, but look at this. The grade B is appearing as 80. However, in the percentage ICT, it is to be 75. So again, it is actually taking the value from the rightmost column in my table array, which is actually the percentage maths. So the lookup function actually works on approximation and does not match my correct values. Okay, let's talk about the second issue in our lookup function. Let me change the grade to grade, let's say G. Now, as you can see that G does not exist in my key, but when I press enter, it actually refers to a value which is 50. So grade G actually does not exist and is actually referring to the rightmost column in my range. So if I double click it, this is my range, and it is actually referring to the rightmost column in which the grade G does not exist, but still I'm getting a value which is actually based on the grade E. All right, let's change it to some other value, let's say M. And let's see if this grade does have an effect on our result. So when I press enter, the value remains at 50, which is again not correct as the grade M does not exist in my list. Let me make one more change to my grade, and I'll put the grade as Z. Again, the Z grade does not exist in my list, but when I press enter, I do get a different corresponding value, which is fail. And then again, it is actually picking it from the rightmost column, which is actually fail over here under percentage maths, but Z grade does not exist. So again, the simple lookup function actually works on approximation. Let's check the other version of the simple lookup function. Let's see if that's different from the simple version. So we'll put equals to sign, we'll type in lookup, open up the bracket. Now we're going to consider the function which is appearing on the top. First, we need to specify the lookup value, which is actually this cell, comma. Now it says the lookup vector. Where will the lookup value will be looked up, right? So we need to specify a range where the lookup value is going to be looked up, so which is actually our grade. And for our replication, these values or this basically cell ranges will not change, so we'll make it absolute. We put the comma and it says the result vector. So for percentage ICT, I am going to select only the percentage ICT column, and I'm going to press F4 to make it absolute so that the replication does not changes my range and it makes it static. So when I press enter, as you can see that the problem is still there. The grade Z does not exist in my range and it is still displaying me a value which is fail. Let's me check with another grade, let's say L, and I'll press enter and it displays 50, which again does not exist in my table or the array or the range of values. So still the simple lookup function is giving me an answer based on approximation. And normally we don't want that. Normally we want to have an exact match. It should look up the correct value from the table. So for instance, if I change the grade to C, press enter, and it displays me 65, which is correct. It is not displaying me any value from the maths or the English column, but the problem with this lookup value still remains. So even if we apply the lookup version in which we have three requirements, the lookup value, the lookup vector, and the result vector, actually fixes my column problem, but does not fix my lookup value problem, which was some grade which does not exist in the list. All right. So now I'm going to apply a different function, which is called VLOOKUP, and see if that can rectify my problem. So I'll put in equals to sign, type in VLOOKUP, I'll open up the bracket. Now I've got a number of requirements. The first requirement is the lookup value, and the lookup value is still the same cell, which is B12. I'll put a comma and it says table array. Now table array can be the whole table because I still need to see whether it's going to take the value from the extreme right column or not. So I'll take the whole table as my reference and I'm going to make it absolute. I'll put on the comma, and the third requirement of the function is column index number, right? Column index number. Now this actually refers to which column it should actually refer to as your answer. Now if you look at our table array, it has 4 columns. Columns are vertical. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 columns. So the purpose of the column index number is that it needs to display the corresponding value, and it needs to take the corresponding value from a particular column. And since I'm looking for the percentage ICT, that is actually column number 2 in my range, right? As you can see, the grades are in column 1, percentage ICT column 2, percentage maths in column 3, percentage English in column 4. So I need to have the corresponding value from the percentage ICT from my range. So I'm going to put the column index number as 2, as the percentage ICT exists in column number 2 of my range. Then we put in a comma and we get to see 2 options appearing. One is true and one is false. False actually means the exact match. True actually means the approximate match. And we have already seen that the simple lookup function actually refers to an approximation. So we are not looking forward to the approximate match. We want the exact match. Now there are 2 methods of selecting false or true. You can double click on it. As you can see, there's false written, or you can also type in 0 for false. All right, that actually means the same. Either you have false or you type in 0, that will mean that you want to look for the exact match. If you double click on the true or the approximate match, it will appear as true. And you can also type in 1 for the approximate match. So 1 and true both means the same. You may use whichever method or whichever option to achieve the actual goal. So 1 and true is approximate match, 0 and false is exact match. So I'm going to put in 0 and see if it gets me the right answer. So if we are to interpret this function, so B12, it will look up the value in B12. The range is specified. It is going to refer to the column number 2 from my range, and it is going to exactly match it. So when I press enter, since I have selected all the values, which included the percentage maths and English, it is not taking the value from the extreme right column. So for grade C, it is not displaying the value 60 in my range. It is actually referring to value 65, which is correct. So my extreme right column problem is actually solved. Now let's look at if I change the grade to something which does not exist in my range. So I'm going to put in X as my grade, and when I press enter, it appears at not applicable. That means that it is going to match it exactly with the contents in my table array. And this is what we want. So usually when the examiner says that use a lookup function, you are to see or to analyze that which type of lookup you need to apply, whether you're going for a lookup as an approximate match or you're going for an exact match. Okay. Now let me change the example. I'm going to take my cell references, I'll copy them, I'll click over here, and I'm going to transpose the data. So dropping down the paste and selecting this option which says transpose. Now what transpose does is it converts the columns into rows and rows into columns. So now I've got this range which exists over here. So let's consider that this is basically is going to be our range of values and not this table. Okay, so let me make some changes to my data. This time the range is actually integrated horizontally. When I say integrated horizontally, that means that each row is actually referring to one type of data. So grades in one row, percentage ICT in one row, percentage maths in one row, and percentage English in one row. So that means the data is integrated horizontally. However, over here, the data was integrated vertically. So in columns, the data was changing, but over here, it is actually changing in rows. So when the data is changing or integrated horizontally, you are to apply not VLOOKUP, but horizontal lookup. So that is basically H lookup. You open up the bracket, you refer to the lookup value, which is actually B12. I'm going to type it out, comma, table array. Now this time, the table array is actually this table. And since I don't want it to change for my replication, I'll make it absolute by clicking F4. I'll put in a comma. Now the third requirement is actually a bit different than the VLOOKUP. It actually wants the row index number. As we said that the data is integrated in rows, so actually we want to refer to which row number we want to have the reference value from. So as you can see in my range, which is integrated horizontally, first row contains the grades, second percentage ICT, third percentage maths, and then percentage English. Since I'm doing it for percentage ICT, that actually exists in row number 2 of my range. So I'm going to input 2 over here as my row index number, comma, and now I need to see whether I want to go for approximate match or exact match. So last time I used 0. Now let's see if the false has the same effect. So I'm going to double click on false to have false applied, which is going to match it exactly. When I press enter, it gives me 85 as my answer for percentage ICT of grade A. And if you look at the table, in this table of values, the grade A is 85 for percentage in ICT, which is correct. Now let's change the grade to something which does not exist in the list, which is S. When I press enter, it says not applicable. So that means that it is trying to find the exact match in my table and refer to the corresponding row, which is actually row number 2. Since it did not find anything which is listed as grade S, so that gives us the answer as not applicable. So this was the concept behind the lookup function. You actually have to see that which type of function you need to apply for the accurate results, whether you're going for the approximate match or you're going for the exact match. If I replicate for my all entries in the cell, I do get the correct values, and you can check it for your reference. You may pause the video to check the answers visually. I'm going to apply it for the percentage maths equals to VLOOKUP, bracket open, lookup value as this, comma. Now I'm going to take up this as my reference, F4 to make it absolute, comma, 3 now, because percentage maths exists in column number 3 of my range. My column or my range actually has 4 columns in total. So percentage maths exists in column number 3. So I'm going to put in 3, comma, 0 for exact match. And I press enter. Do I get the percentage match for grade S? I don't, because the grade S does not exist. But if I replicate for all other entries in my table, I do get a value, and this is actually taking it from the percentage maths column. I hope that this has cleared the confusion about the lookup, VLOOKUP, and HLOOKUP. Do you have any questions? Do let me know. And this is all that I had to discuss in this video. So I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.